Good afternoon. This is James Marsh from the Marsh Law Firm, talking today about the Reginald Archibald scandal involving Rockefeller University Hospital in New York City. This scandal was part of a news story today in the New York Times and has been repeated in several other media outlets throughout the day. It broke approximately 20 hours ago in the New York Times, and it's a story that's been developing over the past 2 weeks. So I'd like to get our broadcast started today. I'm not sure how many people we have joining us, but we do have a question and answer format that people can type their questions in the question box, which should be available on your screen. And I'll do my best to respond to any of the questions that are posed to me today. If not, this broadcast is going to be made available online on our website, and will be available to answer any further questions going forward. You can contact us through any of the information on our site. You can contact anyone at the Pfau law firm that we're partnering with to help deal with this case in New York. And we're going to be in this for the long run. It's obviously been a very busy day for us. We've had a lot of calls, a lot of emails, a lot of chats, and a lot of very upset people today and during the last 2 weeks as this crisis has been developing. For many of the people that we've spoken with, this is nothing new. This has been going on for decades in their lives. And it's been a great deal of pain, a great deal of trauma, a great deal of additional anxiety from the letters that were received 2 weeks ago today. But most of the victims and a few of the survivors that we've spoken with were under no illusions when that letter arrived, exactly what it was about, the contents, and the impact that Rockefeller University and Dr. Archibald has had on their lives. So I do have a slideshow today, a PowerPoint that I'm going to make available that just outlines some of the information and the themes that we have discovered during our investigation over the last 2 weeks. So let me get this set up, and you'll be able to see it on your screen momentarily. This PowerPoint is also available on our website, which is not the New York Sex Abuse Attorney's website. We can also archive it there, but it is available on jamesmarshlaw.com. That information is available in the PowerPoint, and there should be a link online that could take you to additional information about the scandal. Just to get started here, so during the past 2 weeks, as we've been speaking to clients, people that have been making inquiries through our websites and over the phone through chat, we're amazed that this scandal just keeps getting bigger and bigger. The dimensions of it are very broad and very deep, and we're learning new things every day. So this PowerPoint is an attempt to summarize some of the things that we've learned over the past 2 weeks. And again, we're getting more information each day, some of it pretty shocking and pretty disturbing. So this quote here is something that one of the individuals that I spoke with said that really bothered him through the years. Dr. Archibald was someone who was, had a superior sense of himself. And some of the things that he said to our clients had as big an impact as the abuse that they suffered. And this statement was one of them. Without my help and assistance, you will never be a full human being. 1957, Dr. Reginald Archibald. A statement like that made to a 11 or 12-year-old can have quite an impact on their psyche, their sense of well-being. It's not surprising that these are already kids who had faced bullying. They were the shortest kids in the class usually. They were undersized for their age. And to have something like this planted in their minds and in their memories was an additional trauma that they've had to endure almost their entire life. So a little bit of a summary of our involvement in the scandal. Really, you know, we were called earlier this year, spring of 2018. My partner, Jennifer Freeman, got a call. It seemed at that point that it was a pretty routine call. Somebody was asking about some pictures that had disturbed them, something that was in their web file, or their case file, from a medical appointment that happened decades ago. So when we got the call, you know, our work, you know, we're largely known for a lot of our work in child pornography, online exploitation. We've had a case in the United States Supreme Court that was widely reported. So this inquiry sort of, you know, seemed to fit a lot of the things that we did, although it was a rather unusual inquiry given that it involved medical records and things that had happened, you know, decades prior to when the caller was reaching out to us. So, you know, first it was a bit unusual, talking about, you know, records that, you know, HIPAA violations. I don't think there even was HIPAA, you know, 20 or 30 years ago. This person was rightfully concerned about the images, didn't make any mention of, you know, sexual abuse or inappropriate behavior, but knew that images had been taken of him when he was naked and vulnerable at a very young age. And he was rightfully concerned that these images could be not only in a medical file somewhere, but possibly in a medical journal, or, you know, maybe even online somewhere that could identify him. And this was, you know, rightfully pretty upsetting to him. So he called us and expressed this concern. And after discussing the case, you know, we didn't really believe that there was much to go on, but thought that it was worthwhile pursuing it with Rockefeller University Hospital, and instructed the client to make a couple calls, and we would do some follow-up to at least get, you know, a hold of the actual files so that we could, you know, determine what might be in there, what happened to these pictures, whether and how there were pictures. So there was some outreach to Rockefeller University Hospital. They reported that the images could not be found, that they had reviewed the medical record. They couldn't find anything about pictures. Client got a copy of the medical record. There were no images in those records. And, you know, we sort of thought that, you know, there probably wasn't much to go on at that point in time. 30, 40-year-old images and old medical records didn't really leave us much tangible, you know, to pursue. So throughout the summer, we stayed in touch with the client, and, you know, did a little brainstorming and strategizing on what our next steps would be. When in 2 weeks ago, actually, we started getting some inquiries. So when the first calls came in, it was on a Sunday, and involved a lawyer that I am close with. And he called me and said, you know, I've got two longtime clients here that received some sort of a letter from Rockefeller University Hospital. Could you assist? And as soon as I heard, you know, Rockefeller University Hospital, I immediately thought of that other client from over the summer and in the springtime, and called my partner Jennifer and said, you know, maybe this is some sort of coincidence, but wasn't, you know, that person calling about Rockefeller University, and, you know, wasn't that about some images that they were concerned about? So indeed, it was the same concerns, the same Dr. Archibald, and also involved a concern about not only images, but unusual medical practices, and, you know, unusual examination, you know, procedures. So that's what we had to go on initially. The letter itself, there's a copy of it on our website, really was not very specific in terms of the kinds of concerns or the kinds of behaviors that our clients had to experience. But, very quickly we began to discover a great deal more information about what had occurred to these clients over a period of 30 years with this doctor. And as the letters started going out, they were dated September 26th. They were postmarked October 5th, which was unusual. Clients started getting letters over the weekend. Many of them are in the New York metropolitan area and started receiving letters, that the following day. So this very quickly came to a head 2 weeks ago. And we started receiving a great deal of calls that first week, the week of October 7th, and that would have been last week. So by today, and this has probably been widely surpassed by now, we've received over 100 victims that we've spoken to, and gathered some very interesting information about what occurred many, many years ago. But like I said, for our clients, it remains a very real factor in their life. We just set up the, all right, next slide here. And again, like I said, if you have any questions, there is a Q&A chat box, so feel free to type your questions in there. You don't have to identify yourself. You can submit anonymous questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. So about midweek last week, we had a number of clients who were really interested in talking to the press, gaining some additional understanding of what had occurred to them. Some of these individuals had been active for years with this issue, had made calls, written letters, done a great deal of outreach to a variety of people, Manhattan District Attorney, Rockefeller University, some state agencies, to try to seek some sort of investigation or resolution of this issue. And, in all of these cases, which some of them took place as early as 1989, there were no adequate answers given and no real serious attention paid to a lot of these concerns and inquiries from Dr. Archibald's patients. This is something that we feel deserves additional investigation. We're calling on the New York Attorney General to do a comprehensive investigation into this situation with Rockefeller University. It's very much akin to what we're seeing with the Catholic Church and the Pennsylvania Attorney General's investigation, given that there were complaints made to the Manhattan District Attorney, the New York City Police Force, Westchester Police Force, Pelham, Westchester DA. There's a lot of government institutions that need to be investigated, and we need to have answers, given the number of agencies and organizations that were involved. We don't think at this time, the Manhattan District Attorney can really investigate themselves, and clearly, the Westchester District Attorney shouldn't be investigating the Manhattan District Attorney, because the Westchester District Attorney was also involved. And, granted, many of the heads of these organizations have changed, but, the information is, part and parcel of that agency's archives and their mandate. And we just feel that an independent investigation is warranted at this time. And we really are calling on that to happen at the soonest possible time. So given the concerns and, many of the frustrations that our clients had been feeling over, many, many years, we felt that it was imperative that, and they felt it was really driven by the clients, that we bring this matter to a more suitable forum, which in this case was the New York Times investigative journalism department there. And, very quickly, we came to realize that, there's a core set of things that are in common to many of our victims, and we're going to talk about those. But each individual victim, experienced what happened to them in a slightly different manner, and new facts lead to other facts, lead to other people, lead to other dimensions of this investigation. And so the story that was published yesterday by the New York Times, and there's a link to it here in the slide, really is just an overview of many different stories and many different people with many different stories. Again, all of them are fundamentally the same, but all of them have some, very real implications in terms of what we need to be seeing about transparency and a full investigation, a full airing of what happened here, and, certainly steps that need to be put into place to make sure something like this never occurs again. So here's a little bit of what we have uncovered so far. What we have, and again, this is in no certain order here. This certainly not all of these things apply to any one victim. This is information we've been able to gather, composites of information that we've been able to gather from dozens and over 100 individuals in our investigation over the last 10 days to 2 weeks. So what we've learned is that pretty consistently, a lot of the abuse that you read about in the New York Times, a lot of the sexual abuse, a lot of the masturbation and inappropriate behavior with patients occurred at the Rockefeller University Hospital. That much we've determined, and the New York Times talked about that a little bit. And certainly, most of these kids were seen at the hospital pursuant to, a hospital setting. However, we have learned that a few clients have a distinct memory of being seen in Dr. Archibald's private office. It was not a hospital setting. It was not an examination room. It was more akin to a private office. And that's something that needs some further investigation. But again, the vast majority of the abuse took place in the hospital. Second thing that seems to be very common amongst most of the victims is the use of Polaroid camera to take pictures of their genitals. So we did a little investigation into the use of photography and especially Polaroid cameras in the medical settings, and discovered that the use of cameras, the use of Polaroids especially, were common up and through the 1990s. Obviously, everyone who's on this or watching this webcast, which is an internet broadcast, realizes and appreciates that until the mid-90s, there really wasn't digital photography. And certainly the use of a Polaroid was standard medical practice in those days, because, you could get a photo, instant photo, stick it in the file. We were dealing with paper files in that time. And that certainly streamlined the work practices back then. However, what was not standard, to the extent it was in this case, is the very specific pictures of genitals, mostly of boys, very young boys. And one of the variations that we've discovered was that there were some full body photographs taken, of nude children, full bodied. They do remember standing against a wall. They do remember standing with their arms spread sometimes. And then there is another cohort of victims. Many of them were girls, but not all of them, who experienced being photographed in many different positions. So they would be, front, back, side. All of them remembered standing against a stark wall or against, some sort of a neutral background in terms of these full body photographs. Some people remember being measured. Other people don't remember, being measured, but they all do remember multiple photographs. And many of the girls that we've spoken with, not a large number, do recall being photographed in this manner. So that is a variation, again, that is very interesting in this case. Several of the individuals reported to us that Dr. Archibald would tell them that this camera was a special camera because it could see their bones. You know, it could somehow penetrate their skin and see their bones. And I remember a couple of the clients remarked that, you know, even at 8 or 9 or, 10 years old, they thought that there was very unusual that there was a camera out there that could actually see through their body into their bones. Some children question this, what are the pictures for? Or why are you taking pictures? That was obviously easier for them to relate than, why are you masturbating me? Why are you touching me in this way? Which was obviously an uncomfortable thing for many children to bring up. But some of them remarked about the photography, and the doctor's answers were, well, I need these for your file, or that this is for my collection. Some victims report seeing a pile of photographs in his desk drawer. Others of them reported seeing multiple photographs of children, Polaroids of children sitting on his desk, and that this was just an additional photograph that he would add to the top of the pile. So one interesting factor that we've uncovered is that there were a lot of sibling groups involved. This is one of the things that makes this scandal very unusual. These were not isolated occurrences. Oftentimes, Dr. Archibald saw entire families, 3, 4 children, many of them boys. But one of the things that we've recognized a little bit and come to realize is that when girls were sent to him with growth concerns, invariably Dr. Archibald would ask if there were brothers, if they had older siblings, younger siblings, boys. And many times those boys would be brought in for what the doctor called comparison studies. In one case specifically, I remember a girl said that she was sent for growth hormones. She saw the doctor. He asked about her brother. Her brother came in for a companion study, and her brother ended up getting treatment, and she did not. And she felt that her brother was of average or normal size, and she was the short one, so why was he getting treated and she wasn't? Again, clearly, Dr. Archibald's primary interest was on boys, not on girls, and in some ways the girls were used as conduits to bring their brothers in so that the doctor could examine them also. We've also, I think almost all of our clients and all of the individuals that we've spoken to were from Jewish and Italian immigrant families. Not all of them were specifically immigrant families, but their parents or grandparents were newly arrived immigrants in the United States. Now, the vast majority of the abuse occurred between, our earliest client, I believe, is 1956. We have a slide on this, and the last one is 1982. So post-World War II, you had a lot of newcomers to America. Maybe they were first generation or second generation. Clearly, this was a group of individuals who were, up and coming, striving to be part of the middle class. And there was a real racial component to this in that, shorter boys especially were targeted with sort of the mantra that if you get my magic potion, you get my treatment, you can grow up big and strong like all the other real American boys. You don't have to be a scrawny Jewish kid. You don't have to be a scrawny Italian boy. You can grow up big and strong and be a complete human being and look like everyone else. Many of our clients, had been bullied for their size, knew that they were the smallest kid in the class, knew that they were at the front of the line when you lined up for lunch in those days and went down the hall based on your size. And for many of these kids, Dr. Archibald offered some hope that they could be beyond the bullying and that they too could become, big, strong, real Americans like all the other kids in their class and all the other kids that they saw in their neighborhoods. Almost universally, clients report that even when requested, their parents were refused access to the examination room. I remember one story from a boy that Dr. Archibald appeared in the waiting room, which is a very small waiting room. His mother began to get up to go into the room for the examination, and the doctor motioned no, that she should sit down, that he would be conducting the examination without any supervision, that the mom or parents present, most 99% of the time they were moms, didn't need to be there, and that the good doctor would take care of it, and mom could, wait in the waiting room. In several of the cases, we've learned that the examination door itself was locked as the kids went in. They specifically remember the doctor locking the door. And when they made any inquiries about why he was locking the door, the answer was, well, I'm locking the door for your privacy so that nobody comes in. Clearly, that was a pretext for, secreting these kids alone without any supervision, beyond the reach of their parents, beyond the reach of, any sort of help and assistance, and clearly locking the door was just one additional component of that. And again, that kids did take notice of that and consider it unusual. We've also discovered, again, as I said before, the dimensions here are fairly deep and fairly wide. So I was talking to one victim the other day, and I asked him, how did you end up sent to see Dr. Archibald? And he remembered very distinctly in the 8th grade walking down the hallway, being pulled aside by the school nurse, asking his age, looking at his height, and that the New York public school nurse indicated that she was going to call his mother and that he might be eligible for some free medical treatment by this famous doctor at Rockefeller University Hospital to help him with his growth issues. So I've talked to at least 2 clients that were referred by their public school nurses. Many of them were referred by their pediatricians. That seems to be a universal. Lots of kids don't remember exactly how they came to see Dr. Archibald, but they were, referred, most of them by, someone else. And the use of New York City public school nurses as a source of victims for this doctor is an additional concern and should be investigated also. We've also learned that Dr. Archibald recruited boys from the Madison Avenue Boys Club, have been able to find out much information about the Madison Avenue Boys Club. I don't know if it was a precursor to the Boys and Girls Club. There is a Madison Avenue Boys and Girls Club. Perhaps some of our listeners out there and people, watching this video will recognize that if it was the Boys and Girls Club or the Boys Club. But clearly, Dr. Archibald's interest was in boys. Madison Avenue Boys Club, by its very definition, had boys. And we've also had reports that some of the kids came from Covenant House, which is a runaway shelter that has existed in the Times Square area for decades. I'm not sure how long ago Covenant House was founded, but several of our clients have also reported that, Dr. Archibald's treatments were so widespread that other kids would come up to them on the playground, people that they knew from their neighborhood, people that they recognized, or really even just random boys that they knew would say, hey, are you also going to Dr. Archibald? In several cases, these boys said, is he doing things to you? Is he messing with you down there? This is almost an open secret, in certain neighborhoods of short kids that if you were short, which is easy, obviously, to see, that you were probably going to see Dr. Archibald. And some of the kids knew, obviously, that if you were seeing Dr. Archibald, he was probably doing to you what he was doing to them. And so we found that is a very interesting fact in this case. We've had other very unusual thing about this pattern of abuse is it does involve entire families. I've had families where 4 boys all saw Dr. Archibald. I've had lots of sibling pairs, boys and girls. Have never seen a girl and girl. I've never seen that combination, but boys, definitely. Usually if one boy went, all the boys went. Usually if a girl went, her brother, older or younger, would go. This seems to be a pattern. And again, you know, we're talking sibling groups here, which again is you know, very unusual. X-rays, another universal thing seems to be that X-rays were part of the protocol. This is obviously, if you talk to a pediatric endocrinologist, this seems to be a more typical, you know, protocol where X-rays were taken of the hands, especially, or different bones, can measure growth rates and propensity for growth rates. So some of our clients reported having X-rays, but not all of them. This seems to be hit or miss in terms of whether or not you got X-rayed. So that's very curious also. Of the biggest concern, obviously, and the reason this case has garnered so much attention is the use of masturbation by Dr. Archibald in a very non-traditional and medically unnecessary manner. Most all of our clients, certainly all of the male clients, or a great many of the male clients, reported masturbation in some context. Either Dr. Archibald would ask them to masturbate, some as young as 6 or 7 years old. He would inquire about masturbation. He would talk about masturbation. He almost universally requested that the boys masturbate themselves, and either sitting on an examination table or lying on an examination table. In certain cases, boys would be sitting on his lap when they would masturbate. And in more extreme cases, Dr. Archibald would masturbate them, sometimes to ejaculation, either on an examination table or on his lap. In certain very extreme cases, Dr. Archibald would ask them to touch him, to demonstrate masturbation on him. Sometimes he would demonstrate masturbation on himself. Sometimes he would masturbate them, and many times they would be forced to touch him. Various other, you know, variants of this were, again, in terms of getting more extreme, that Dr. Archibald would kiss them, would stroke their hair, and in several cases we have reported forced anal intercourse, and sometimes in a hospital setting, and other times at his home, which we're going to talk about at the next slide. So there was a lot of touching, fondling, masturbation, ejaculation, and again, this served no medical necessity. And according to one pediatric endocrinologist that I spoke with earlier this week, you know, it was wrong now and it was wrong then. There was no clinical reason to masturbate or have young boys, especially 6, 7, 8 years old, masturbate themselves, certainly not touching him, and certainly not some of the child sex abuse and grooming behaviors that he engaged in. That is obviously a great deal of concern. There is a report that nurses would provide sample collection cups, you know, presumably for, you know, semen. We don't have any records at this point of semen being actually collected in those cups. We do have reports of urine samples. We do have reports of urinalysis that are in several of the files that we reviewed, but we don't have any evidence that semen was actually collected for clinical purposes and subject to any sort of assessment or testing, or, you know, however that would be done. So we haven't seen that yet, and it's very interesting that you know, that there was urine tests, which obviously again is a typical part of any, you know, medical examination of this type. And again, as I say on the slide here, he was instructing even very young boys to ejaculate, and several of them reported not for the purposes of collection, but after ejaculating, he would clean them up with towels, he'd clean them up with paper towels, and there was no clinical sorts of collection of ejaculate or semen going on. And this is a quote from Dr. Archibald's neighbor in Pelham from 1974. One of my client clearly remembers this. He was in the neighborhood. He was looking for a car. He recalled seeing Dr. Archibald, whom he thought was Dr. Archibald, in his yard. The woman that was selling the car was a next door neighbor. And when he made an inquiry of her, do you know who that is? The woman said to him, that's where Dr. Archibald lives. He does scientific experiments on little boys. That was his reputation, widely known reputation in Pelham, in the community, that he was experimenting on children. And for several of our clients, many of them are Jewish and Holocaust survivors and children of Holocaust survivors, they reported that Dr. Archibald's invocation of scientific experiments on them, or being part of a experimental protocol, or somehow being a participant in experiments, reminded them of the suffering and tragedy that their parents and families had suffered in the Holocaust, and that they too now were part of some scientific experiment by this clearly a WASPy establishment institution kind of doctor. And for many of our clients, or some of those people that remember that, it has chilling and very disturbing implications in their life, that these were experiments, scientific experiments, and clearly, based on one of my clients' discussions with a neighbor, everyone knew that Dr. Archibald was doing, scientific experiments on little boys, a very disturbing implication of this case. Okay, in terms of what we know so far about the victim profile, our earliest known victim, again, this is only the subset of the individual people that we've spoken to. So we can't make generalities of anyone that's coming in the future, and we certainly have a very small subset, unfortunately, of all of the population of victims out there. But from what we have seen in terms of our clients and the people that have contacted us, we have earliest known victim 1954, which is consistent with, obviously Dr. Archibald's tenure at Rockefeller University Hospital. And his latest known victim was in 1982, which was around the time that he went on senior status. Although reports of him in the hospital for, a decade beyond that have been also revealed to us in some of our discussions. Even as late as 1989, patients who had gone back to Rockefeller University to get their records or make inquiries about the growth hormones that they were subjected to were referred to Dr. Archibald, who was still on the premises and available to release records or presumably answer any questions, which I don't think, at least from our knowledge, that he answered any questions. Many, there was a subset of kids, many of them, that went once and never went back for good reasons. Almost all of them describe, I went there and I never wanted to go back there again. It had a clear and lasting trauma. It was extremely traumatic and very disturbing. And most kids who saw him once did not want to go back. In fact, not one of the kids that we've spoken with, obviously they're adults now, but they were children at the time, have reported anything but, after the first visit, I didn't ever want to go back there. And whether they did go back there or didn't go back there, they knew that it was a place that they didn't want to be. So again, some of them went once, some of them went half a dozen times. We've had certain clients who've gone there, went there for a decade. And some clients whose last appointment was scheduled after Dr. Archibald had retired. So, it really runs the gamut, again, from 1954 to 1982, a period of almost 30 years that this was going on at Rockefeller University Hospital. Clearly a very disturbing, set of circumstances, and beyond lax oversight and really no accountability for Dr. Archibald And as we've seen in subsequent years, there's really been no accountability for the institution that allowed this to happen, knowingly allowed it to happen. Clearly 14 years ago, they knew that this had happened. And clearly based on some of the discussions with people that we've talked to, they knew a decade before that. So this is something that we're going to get to the bottom of, and is one of the more really troubling aspects of what went on here. Again, not episodic and not, once in a blue moon and not over a period of several years. This is something that went on over a period of decades, and that involved thousands and thousands of patients, all traumatized by the experience, and again, with impunity. I think that is the best way to say it. It was allowed to occur with impunity for decades. We've had several instances where parents have complained. In one instance, where a mother complained after her son had revealed what had happened to her, Dr. Archibald told them to leave and never come back. We've had other parents who have contacted us. There are still several of them are alive. They made complaints to nurses, hospital administrators, people that were around at the time, and none of those complaints were ever followed up. And obviously, given Dr. Archibald's tenure of many decades, there were no apparent consequences. Okay, some of the other interesting facts that we've been able to uncover here, which is, how were the victims located by Rockefeller University? What's been reported to us is that Rockefeller University, as a research institution, does maintain a pretty extensive collection of patient files going back decades. Given their role as a research institution and given their prominence in the fields of medical science and research, it's not unusual to have files that are really historic. So that actually is a good thing for our clients and the victims of this situation. What is unusual and concerning to our clients is how the match was made. So according to Rockefeller University, what we've been able to determine in our investigation is that they've got all these patient files. They sort them by year, they sort them by name, however they're maintained. Obviously, we're not in the computer age. We're not Googling and indexing electronic files. So they had all these records, but they did not have a cross-reference to the doctors. So a child could call up, a patient could call up and say, I'm, Jenny Smith, 1954. Do you have that record? And they could find it. They couldn't find the patients of Dr. Archibald, and they couldn't necessarily find records that were associated with him without anything more. So apparently, at some point in time, again, it's very unclear of when and how, but Dr. Archibald's family located a metal box with 3x5 cards, which contained all of his patients that he'd seen over the, during his career, his 30-year career. When I talked to other medical professionals, they said, oh yeah, those are the cards, that we used to, pre-computer, that we used to maintain, and they were little index cards, and you'd have some basic patient information, maybe a name, maybe an address, age, date of birth, something like that. So when Dr. Archibald's family discovered this metal box, they turned it over to Rockefeller University, and at that point in time, they were able to make the match to all of the patients of Dr. Archibald. That is the explanation we've been given. However, one of the unanswered questions, if you will, is, were there images of children in that box? According to Rockefeller University and Dr. Archibald's family, there were no images found. We don't know if that's true. We don't know if their images were somewhere else or located in a different place. The whereabouts, location, disposition of these images, which clearly is a source of a great deal of trauma and anxiety for many of our clients, our whereabouts are unknown. So that is a very concerning factor in this case and something that we need to get to the bottom of. We've also heard reports from clients and others that Dr. Archibald was reportedly arrested in the Midwest. Some people think it was Wisconsin, some people think that was in Michigan, but at some point, either in his career, before, during, or after, he was arrested in the Midwest for some sort of inappropriate behavior with children. We used to call it child molestation. I don't know, inappropriate child endangerment. I don't know what they would call it, but there is some reports that occurred. And again, that's something that needs some further investigation. One thing that we do know that happened, which is very disturbing, is that a young patient of Dr. Archibald's was taken to his island retreat in Canada. I'm not going to try to pronounce this. Lake Temagami, which is in Ontario, north of Sudbury, in Canada. A good, 15 hours probably from New York, a long trip. And this is something that one of our clients has reported to us, that he became the summer helper, the summer boy that was taken to the lake, and that he was severely sexually abused during that time by Dr. Archibald. And he was allowed to go because Dr. Archibald used his prestige and his authority to convince the parents that this would be good for their son. This is something that the doctor did every summer, that he invited certain of his patients to go along, to help him around the house, to get the camp ready for the summer. And that the bonus for this child was that he would treat him for his acne during this summertime period. Instead, this client suffered severe and grievous injuries that he's still recuperating from this day at the hands of Dr. Archibald in Canada. This quote is from Dr. Archibald in 1969 when he told one of my female clients that you should never have children because they will be quote unquote mongoloids, which is the term that was used in those days for Down syndrome. This is something that perplexed my client. She didn't realize that she was being subjected to any sort of a genetic study. We weren't aware if Dr. Archibald was doing genetic studies during that time. And clearly this is something that has stayed with her for decades. And indeed, she never had children, in part because of what Dr. Archibald had warned her about in 1969. A lifetime of despair and adverse influences, adverse outcomes because of something a doctor said to her in 1969 when she was just a young girl, 8 years old. Okay, what do we know about the impacts on the victims in this case? Many of you that have done this work are familiar with victims and survivors of childhood sexual abuse. This list will, be very familiar, sadly familiar to you. It goes beyond saying, I've been working in this field for 30 years, and these are all the things that we know that happens to victims of childhood sexual abuse. It's not unusual and very, very clinically indicated in almost every case of childhood sexual abuse. Vivid images of certain things that they remember about Dr. Archibald, about the situation they were put in, about the masturbation, the being masturbated, forced to stand naked, remove their clothes, remain naked in his presence. All of these are still very vivid in many people's minds. The memories, the nightmares, and the flashbacks, all of these things have been reported by our clients, many of them 60, 70, even 80 years old, remembering things that happened 50 years prior like they were yesterday. And if you know anything about childhood sexual abuse and trauma, this is very, very typical of what these kinds of victims and survivors face. Not every day, but clearly, it's a dominant thing in their life that they cannot get beyond. So this is very typical. And clearly, since the letters have gone out, that has reactivated a lot of this. These are daily occurrences for many people now. It's not unusual at all. We've had reports of suicide attempts, depression, anxiety. One of the most difficult things for a lot of these kids, and I call them kids even though they're 50, 60, 70 years old, because they were children at the time, is that this was a family secret, something that siblings experienced together, but something that they never talked about. It was obviously a different era. Things were not discussed, not that a lot of things are discussed now, but things were discussed even less then. And in this context, you had 2, 3, 4 brothers sharing, a secret of Dr. Archibald's, that as close as they got to discussing it. Obviously for brothers and sisters, it was even more uncomfortable, knowing that possibly and most likely you and your brother or sister shared a secret of sexual abuse by Dr. Archibald. It's something that really has only come to the surface in the last 2 weeks, things that have only been discussed recently, but a burden that has been carried with people for their entire life. That is the nature of childhood sexual abuse. That is what we see when things like this are allowed to happen. Among the most serious victim impacts, for most of our clients and the people that we've talked to, is why it took Rockefeller University Hospital 14 years, by their own admission, from their last investigation, which we have no idea what that investigation entailed, to actually make this link to the victims. And it was not done in a very transparent manner. What most people don't realize, and which isn't necessarily clear from any of the reporting, is that there are actually 2 different public statements or public documents that are currently, available regarding this scandal. The first one is the letter that was sent to the victims 2 weeks ago today. Those letters, for lack of a better term, didn't contain any information for the victims, other than the telephone number and email address of the lawyers representing Rockefeller University. Now, nowhere in these letters were there any mention made that these individuals at Debevoise & Plimpton, which is a very large New York law firm, corporate white shoe firm in the city of New York, were actually had adverse interests to the people and the victims that were instructed to call them. This is, very questionable in terms of New York ethics. And I posted some information about this on my website. Very concerning that, traumatized individuals would get a letter that contained no information, and the only source of that information were the lawyers for the hospital. The letter wasn't signed by any member of the hospital or university staff, no signature. Clearly, nobody at that institution wanted to touch this letter in any way. Not a name. There's not a phone number for the institution on the letterhead. The only source of information for these victims who suffer a great deal of trauma decades ago and had been having questions their entire life about what happened. The only source of information were the lawyers for the institution. Now, according to some of our clients' subsequent conversations with Debevoise & Plimpton, they claim, well, we're not representing, the institution. We're not representing Rockefeller University Hospital in any litigation, right? They're not representing them in litigation. Okay, that's fine. They're not representing them in litigation. But as one client said, what are you doing with my information that I'm giving you then? What is becoming of the answers to the questions that you're posing to me today? What are you doing with all of the details that I'm providing you? Is that going to be shared with the institution? Is that going to go in a file which could potentially be used against me in any future litigation? Even if Debevoise & Plimpton are not the firm handling the litigation, right? They're not representing the hospital for litigation, but anything short of litigation or anything beyond neutrality is of questionable ethical implications. So clearly, this release of information was handled very poorly by the institution and has re-traumatized many of our clients and many of the individuals that we've spoken with. And honestly, with all the scandals out there, Larry Nassar, Penn State, even the criticisms of Senator Feinstein, you know, institutions need to know that they need to operate in a transparent, honest, and open manner. Sending a letter to traumatized victims with no other information in there other than the name of their lawyers, the institution's lawyers, is beyond a travesty. It's a serious re-victimization of all the people who had already suffered so much under Dr. Archibald's care. Ironically, at the same time as these letters were going out, Rockefeller University Hospital posted a statement on its website about the entire affair, about Dr. Archibald. We've also got it on our website, and you can find it on the Rockefeller University website. That information was not included in the letter. Like, you know, if they're going to release this information publicly, you're going to stick it on a website somewhere. Why not at least provide some information to the victims and put it in the letter that you're sending to them? No explanation for this, no reason that it wasn't handled more professionally, no reason to re-traumatize these victims that had already suffered so much. So clearly, that's another issue that needs to be addressed, and we need to have answers. The cover-up itself, you know, led to additional trauma, anger, and frustration. People have been dealing with this for decades. Some people had made prior complaints. Some people had gotten nowhere. Some people have been dealing with this issue and trying to find answers for decades. Nothing was ever done until this week. And again, the impetus for this current investigation is the images. And that's what the Marsh law firm has been dealing with for the last 10 years. It cannot be understated that the trauma and the anxiety and the fear and the upset about the presence of child images, naked children images, child erotica potentially, clearly inappropriate, clearly disturbing to many kids. That cannot be understated. And that's what led to this current investigation and the outreach. And that's where we're going to finish today. That, again, these images and the potential for the widespread distribution with the internet, people are not stupid, being identified in medical journals, the possibility of having these images, you know, out there in the world. We've had examples where they've torn down houses and an old pediatrician's, you know, child pornography, you know, cache was hidden in the walls. That happened in Connecticut back in 2007, about 10 years ago. People have read these stories. They're not stupid. They know the potential for having this material in circulation. And this is an ongoing source of anxiety, an ongoing source of fear and upset. And until this issue is adequately investigated and addressed, that kind of fear and upset is going to go on potentially for the rest of their lives for these people, being identified with these images for the rest of their life. Some children have images taken every time they were there. Every 6 months, they have a new set of images made of them. Clearly, this was no legitimate protocol. And these child images, child nudity, child erotica, we need to get to the bottom and discover where those images are. So I see we're almost, times are up. It's almost been an hour, believe it or not. And I'm really happy to share what we've learned from the first 2 weeks of our investigation into this matter, trying to get answers for our clients, for our victims, and for the public on how an esteemed New York institution could have violated thousands of children for decades. In my estimation, this is going to be one of the largest institutional child sex abuse cases in U.S. history, excepting, of course, the Catholic Church. And you know, the implications for this for so many children are going, you know, obviously they're not children anymore, but so many of the victims affected by this are going to continue well into their lives, perhaps till the end of their lives. So this is where you'll find information about our law firms, the Marsh Law Firm in New York, the Pfau, Cochran, Vertetis, and Amala out in Seattle. Both of our firms have extensive experience representing victims of childhood sexual abuse. Both of our firms only represent victims. We don't represent defendants. We don't represent institutions. We don't represent any party with adverse interest to our clients. We never have, and we never will. We have a great deal of experience in this area. We're willing to help anyone that needs help. There's no pressure with us, no obligation. You're welcome to call, put your name, be on our email list. We are going to get to the bottom of this scandal for the thousands and thousands of New Yorkers who are suffering today from things that happened decades ago, things that they had no responsibility for as children, things that no child should have responsibility for, especially when seeking, top-notch medical services from an established New York institution like Rockefeller University Hospital. But thank you for watching. If you made it for 1 hour to the end of this broadcast, thank you for watching. And again, if you have any questions, I see nobody's posted any Q&As, but if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please reach out to us at the information below. You can call our 1-800 number, 888-811-8689, 24 hours a day to reach us. NewYorkSexAbuseAttorneys.com. That's our site that we've partnered with, the Pfau law firm, to offer services to these victims in New York. And we're proud to be affiliated with them, and we're proud for representing the victims of this terrible, tragic situation with Dr. Reginald Archibald and Rockefeller University Hospital in New York City. Thank you very much for watching. And this video will be archived on our website and made available to the public. And for all the victims that are watching this, you have our deepest sympathies and concerns. And I can assure you personally that we are going to get answers for you and your families. What happened to you? I would like to say it will never be repeated, but clearly something went wrong for many, many years, and you deserve answers. We're going to get to the bottom of this and look forward to sharing another video with you in the future. Thank you again for watching. Have a good weekend.